90.3 WHPC now presents Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now, learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property, and learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau, a past dean of the Nassau Academy of Law, and frequently lectures to lawyers on ethics and avoiding problems with clients, and to the public on how to choose and use lawyers. This is Law You Should Know on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. Today, my guest is Peggy McColl, and we're going to continue our discussion. This is part 2 of our series on your book, Your Business, Your Breakthrough, how lawyers and others can conceive and begin to edit and outline and write and successfully publish, perhaps earning a lot of money for their book. And Peggy is the author of your book, Your Business, Your Breakthrough. She has written many books. She's guided many people through the book writing process, and she also has a wealth of information if you want to do all or part of the process on your own. Peggy, welcome back to Law You Should Know.
Thank you for having me back. Delighted to be here.
In the prior program, which is available at nccradio.org, just to refresh our listeners, they have different options. And one of them is self-publishing versus having a publisher do the publishing for you. And what are some of the choices involved? Of course, you've got to successfully attract the publisher, but what are some of the other considerations?
You have to get a literary agent if you're going to consider a publishing house. And literary agent is someone who will represent you. They're going to earn based on what you earn, and they only earn if you earn money, so they're highly inspired to sell your book. But before you contact a literary agent, you should have a book proposal completed first.
And what does a proposal consist of?
Think about this. It's like a sales tool. It is a tool that's going to sell the book idea. The book's not written, but the book proposal would contain an overview, perhaps a sample chapter, your marketing and promotional plan about the author, about you, perhaps some testimonials of things that people have said about you, and anything that would be attractive to a publishing house. Why this book? Why now? Why is it different from everything else that's out there in the world? What are you going to do to promote this book? So that's what's included in a book proposal. I have found personally that it has taken me as long to write a book proposal as it has to write a book, but a rewarding experience.
And if you choose to go right to the book, you mentioned in our prior program about how to get started. What are some other ideas to further that process along?
Yeah, I think it's, what I choose and what I recommend and what most people are doing nowadays is they are self-publishing their book. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, it's easy to do. And second, you're going to earn more money if you're self-published. I had a client that I worked with who had sold, she was a professional, but she had written a children's book. And she illustrated it herself. She wrote it herself, decided to self-publish, and she had sold around 40,000 copies, which is a lot. It really is a lot of book sales. And I introduced her to my literary agent, and my literary agent got her a publishing deal with an advance of $250,000. And last year, I got an email from my literary agent to tell me that the client that I sent to her has now sold more than 5 million copies of her children's books.
And I hope your check was in the mail.
I didn't get any check in the mail, but thanks for thinking of me, Ken.
So what distinguishes the typical person who wants to write a book from the person who can sell millions of copies eventually?
Luck? No, I'm just kidding. I think there's an element of that there, but I think it's two things. It's the book and just perhaps the uniqueness of the book, and it's how they're marketing it. Like, marketing is everything. I remember when I wrote my first book, I went to a conference in LA, and one of the speakers that was there, he stood on stage and he said, if you finished your book as an author, 5% of your job is done. He said 95% of your success is going to be dependent upon the marketing and the promotion. And that was a great learning experience.
And that's true for lawyers or other professionals as well. You could be the greatest, the smartest lawyer in the world, but if no one comes to you, if no one knows that, you're going to starve.
Exactly. Same thing as being an author. So you need to be ready to promote.
And what are some of the ways to promote that especially self-published authors do or really need to do or step on, to elevate their game?
We had talked a little bit about this in our first session together, and that is, you mentioned articles, like write some articles, get some articles out there, or you could even use excerpts from your book as articles. I've done that numerous times with many of the books that I've written, is pulled out excerpts, but then wrote something above, something below to sort of to sandwich it, and had those posted on sites all over the world. You could create a podcast. You could go on social media and, be very, very active. These are a number of different ways to promote your book. Get speaking engagements.
And essentially, Reader's Digest is that segments or excerpts of books.
Right. You want to get people's attention, and bite-sized content is the way to go, because that's the way of the internet. You could even start a YouTube channel if you wanted and put content up there.
And it might be some quotes or letting people who publish papers or magazines, whether it's online or actually in print, know about the book, the uniqueness of the book, the value of the book, to just help spread the word.
Totally. I mean, we see that all the time. And that's the thing. I want everyone to understand that word of mouth still works. It works in your business. It works in my business. It still works. So you want to create content. You want to be present. You want to be out there. And of course, you want to have a great book too. So people will talk about you, tell their friends.
And how can you make a difference in terms of the content? How can you elevate the interest and excitement of your content?
This is really where the common sense piece comes in, because if you've written a book, and depending on the type of book that you've written, and you read your book and you really love it, like you feel good about it, then you've likely have, great content right there. But if you read your book and you're doubtful or you think it's crap, it probably is. It very likely is. But get some beta readers, get some friends, some colleagues to read it, give you honest feedback. Now, of course, we also talked in our first segment about an editor. Make sure that you hire a great editor that's going to turn your work into a wonderful piece of art.
And as an editor, do you generally think people sometimes write too much about something and the language is kind of dry and you help them find the kernels in there? Or do they sometimes write too little about something that you think would be of exciting and interest to potential readers?
And both of those things happen for sure. And even when you're hiring an editor, there's different types of editors. There's editors that are just going to go through and do almost like a proofread, grammar, spelling, just check those things. Or you could hire a developmental editor, and that developmental editor would help you with the whole formatting and ensure that it all fits really, really well together. And there's a wonderful flow to the content of your book.
Other suggestions to make that book more readable, more marketable, easier to promote?
Also, again, we're talking about fiction and nonfiction. So one of the things that really works well is if you can design the book in a way that makes sense. I was showing one of my books today to one of my classes because I teach a program, and I was explaining that one of the books that I wrote that's translated into multiple languages, it's actually been designed in different parts. So there's part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, and then there's chapters that are within these parts of the book. But the parts are like different topics, and then there's subtopics that are in the chapters of those books. And that just made sense for the content. So that's another way. And that can start with the organization part of it when you're outlining the book, or you could write the content and realize later you need to go back and organize it differently. Organize it in a way that when somebody looks at it and they look at the outline or they look at the table of contents, they can either go straight to a section if they wanted to, or they can start at the beginning and read all the way through so they know what they're getting.
And is this more for nonfiction, or it applies to fiction as well?
That would probably apply for fiction, nonfiction. Usually in a fiction book, the way that the outline is done is it's just listed like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. And part of the reason is they don't want to give it away, right? You want to keep intrigue.
And sometimes people are very successful about writing fictional books that relate to their field of expertise, whether they're a lawyer or they're some kind of other expert, and it's a way of conveying information, but in a fictional setting.
Absolutely. And you know, something that's interesting is during COVID, fiction sales rose above nonfiction. They were far more fiction book sales than there were nonfiction. Why is that? Well, people were wanting to be entertained. They really want to be entertained more than they were educated. My last 3 books, my 19th, 20th, and 21st books are fiction, but they're parables and they're based on my life. So I created a character and I wrote about her, but many of my own stories, many of the things that I've gone through are, illustrated in those books, in those fiction books.
And you're still working on your autobiography.
I'm not going to write an autobiography.
Now, who would be able to write and market an autobiography? What might set their story out and make it marketable?
Typically autobiographies are written by people that are known, famous people that have a recognized name. When someone tells me that they want to write their autobiography, it's like, okay, but unless your name is a known name in the marketplace, it can create a challenge. However, you can still write a form of an autobiography, just do it differently. And that's kind of what I did with my last 3 books, which are in a trilogy. They're called Savvy Wisdom, but they're written in a way that it is my life and what I went through.
I would like to remind everyone that we're listening to Peggy McColl, and she is the author of your book, Your Business, Your Breakthrough. As you've heard, she is an expert at helping authors, whether it's in writing or editing or marketing their books. And she also has plenty of information available on her website to help guide people along. You're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, Long Island. And Peggy, why don't you give us your website where there's information available if people want other guidance for authors or just about the writing process?
Yes, sure. It's my name, Peggy McColl, which is PeggymcColl.com, PeggyMcColl.com.
I know that you also suggest that you don't have to be a great writer to be a good author. And why is that true?
Because there are these wonderful people on our planet called editors. There's also ghostwriters, and I've used ghostwriters over the years. And I believe the best time to use a ghostwriter is if you don't have time to write your book and you've got money to pay for a ghostwriter, because they can be expensive. And I've seen ghostwriters anywhere from $5,000 to $150,000 for them to write your book. And as I said, I think I've spent about $80,000 on ghostwriters. And that's probably for about 4 books that they've written for me. I enjoyed the experience because it sure made it a lot easier, but they still demand your time. You still have to meet with them. They're going to extract that information from you in order to write it into your book. And I think another thing to keep in mind is if you're going to use a ghostwriter, make sure that they write in a way that it sounds like you and that you're also very familiar with the content. Because if you end up on a radio show and they ask, someone asks you about your book and you're not that familiar with it, you could find yourself in a little bit of a challenging situation.
And if you're going to be your own ghostwriter, it's important that someone, write the book, get it down in a rough draft, and then go over it themselves, show it to friends and family, bring in an editor, and fine-tune it chapter by chapter.
Yeah, you've got to invest the time to do that. And what happens quite often is after an author has written their book and they're reading it and they're reading it again and reading it again, they might get to a point where they just don't want to see it anymore because they've read it so many times, and that's okay. Because once that's out there in the world, it is a reflection of you and it's out there. Now, yes, you can create another revision or another edition of the book, but it's still out there. And what happens now is because they have resellers online is the book that's out there. Let's say there's some errors in it, and then you decide to upload a new version of the book or a new edition, and that's fine. But those other previous versions are still out there and people resell them and they're still a reflection of you.
And let's take a step back and talk about planning. So it's important that, and you discussed it in the first portion of this program, which is available at nccradio.org, but it's important that someone conceive why they're writing a book, who the target audience is, what the points they want to cover, whether it's fiction or nonfiction.
Correct, it is. And, I think there's in some cases, people think it has to take years to write a book. It doesn't. I wrote my first book in a month, but it wasn't a month of writing. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. I got up Monday through Friday, an hour earlier than normal, and I wrote for an hour. And at the end of those 20 days, I had a book written. And it took 20 hours, essentially. I wrote another book in a weekend. It doesn't have to take a long period of time. I wrote my first fiction book in about 10 days. Again, it wasn't 10 straight days of writing. I'm a busy woman. I'm a busy entrepreneur. It was, I just plugged in a couple hours here and there at times that I felt that I could write, and I got it done. And
you hope that the profit stream lasts a lot longer than the writing process.
It definitely lasts a lot longer than the writing process.
And if people write, let's say, a column for a literary magazine, they can write a sample chapter. They can write the first chapter of the book and get some feedback, get their name out there, see how the experience works for them.
You know, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that's another way of writing a book. There's, if you have materials out there already, articles that you've already written, repurpose the materials. I did that with one of my books as well, is I just took content of blogs that I had written, articles that I had written, and I put them together and edited it, of course, and then added an introduction, and that became the content of a book.
And if you're a lawyer or other professional, you can write an article on some new development, some recurring development about the law. Try to publish it, try to circulate it online, put it on your website, see what feedback you get, and then try to continue on from there.
Yeah, you could even take talks. If you're doing talks, lectures, speeches, have them transcribed. That can become a content for your book or a chapter.
And it's also good if you're doing talks to, let's say, have handouts or outlines or related articles that you've written that you circulate prior to the talk, because you may only have 10 or 100 people come to the talk. If you send out and circulate to your website, to others, physically put them out somewhere, to the sponsoring organization, your expertise, your website, your articles ahead of time, and also follow it up with a summary of your talk, a copy of your talk, other related background materials, you multiply the benefits of that talk and help get your name and enhance your status out there.
And you could also use a book as a giveaway if you're doing a talk, and it could be a lead generator to people doing business with you. So you could have in the back of the book perhaps a discount card or a coupon card or whatever, saying, go to my website and, sign up to get have a session or whatever. So it could be a lead generator for business that could be used.
But as you mentioned earlier, it helps set you apart from everyone else, that you have written a book. I mean, it's true for an article too, that you have circulated that book, that book is full of helpful, useful information, which of course you will hope it will, lead to some kind of legal business. But it's more important, and maybe you'll make a few bucks off of this, but more important, it will help elevate your status as a lawyer or professional or expert and separate you from the rest of the pack.
Yeah, it's true. As soon as you say, I'm an author, people think, oh, you're automatically an expert or you have some specialized skill. I really believe anybody can write. Great readers also make great writers. If you've read a lot of materials, and if you're a lawyer, you certainly have, then you can likely write as well. It's not that complicated.
And also writing or lecturing or giving a presentation about your book helps enhance your communication skills and makes you a better presenter, which not every lawyer or professional or even author is. So it's helping you in a lot of ways.
Totally.
And it's promoting your brand as well.
Yes, it is. You're right about that.
Have you written a book, Ken? No, I just have my body of work on the radio.
All right, great. Well, you can take your radio shows, perhaps.
Yes, a collection of them. And I tell people it's very good when you're trying to fall asleep. It's non-addictive, and it works better than drugs.
Excellent.
What other tips do you have out that you want to expand upon in terms of finding something that you can write about and going through those different steps? Yeah,
I would say to understand that there's just no end to where this can go as far as enhancing your life and your career and your bank account as well. When I think back to writing my first book, and it did many of the things that we've been talking about here, it led to a lot more clients, a lot more business, because of the credibility as well. But even if you're writing a fiction book, you can still lead people back to your website. For example, I created a course based on my book. or many of my books actually have a course related to the material in the book. And then in the back of the book, you put a sales page and send people, drive people back to your website. And you could be like, I have people coming to my site all the time buying my courses, and I'm not necessarily doing anything to promote it. I've done zero advertising for my fiction books, and yet people are buying the course that's a part of it all the time.
And also that there's a tremendous lack of information about the law. Most, even sophisticated business people can't always keep up with the law. There's a lot going on out there. Consumers don't know all they really need to and want to know about various areas of the law. And they seek reliable, simple, important, easy to understand information. And through writing and public speaking and perhaps putting out a book, lawyers fulfill a public service as well as promote themselves.
There is an investment of time involved, but it's not massive. That's another, I think, myth that's out there in the world, is that if you're going to become an author, it's going to take over your life or take over your career. Not true. Like, even though I have 21 books in the last 20 years, 21 books in 21 years, it didn't take massive amounts of time, and it doesn't take massive amounts of time to promote. This is not what I do full time. It's kind of like a part-time gig. And yet, it's brought so much value to my life and to my business as well.
And if you're in a lawyer or another organization with partners, can you just, kind of divide the work, assign everyone different chapters and then, work on editing each other's work?
I did a book like that one time. I did a book called Destinies, and it was a collaborative book, which means you've got a number of different authors that are, contributing to the book to create a chapter. The thing that I found with that is that the book is only as good as the weakest link. So, excuse me. So if you have a story in there that's not very well written, then people are going to get an impression of your book by, one of the stories. So it was like herding cats when I was doing a collaborative book. I had the experience, but I'd never do it again.
And that's important to make sure that the lawyers or other professionals or your colleagues, have it in them to write a book or have resources to make it a little bit more interesting and, of course, make it understandable. I just want to remind our listeners, we're talking with Peggy McColl. She's a teacher and mentor to authors and helps them with whatever it takes to get their book published. And she's also the author of your book, Your Business, Your Breakthrough. And you're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nats Community College. We've discussed some of the background material and conceiving and writing the book on another program, and you can go to the NCC website at nccradio.org to listen to that podcast. And of course, this program is a podcast, and you can listen to any details you'd like to hear again or tell someone else about it and find it at nccradio.org. Peggy, what other tips do you have out there for lawyers or others, do's and don'ts who want to become authors?
I think it's also to understand the expense that could be involved in writing a book as well. And if you're going to self-publish a book, you're looking at editing cost, layout and design of the interior, and cover cost. Those are typically the three costs, but it's free to upload a book to Kindle Direct Publishing. You can get book covers done for $99. You can find editors now that are very qualified for, let's say, less than $1,000. That's the most I think I've ever paid an editor to edit a book. Now, of course, you're going to make sure that you give the editor a book that's pretty good shape. Layout and design is usually $5 a page. So if you have 100 pages, it's $500. So we're not talking about huge costs in creating a book and having it available in the world. So I think that's an important thing for any potential author to know.
And these expenses are worth it to elevate the status and the look of your book.
I think it's one of the best investments of time, energy, and money that anyone can make. It's truly, like in my career, when I think about my career, it is the best thing that I ever did was when I decided to write a book. And I fell in love with it. I became addicted to writing books. That happens with a lot of authors. They write the first one, then they want to write their next one and their next one. Of course, your second one is going to be a lot easier to write than your first one.
And it's writing, but it's about communication, where you're a professional, whether you're an accountant or a lawyer or some kind of business advisor, and people come to you for information and guidance. And it's just reiterating what you would tell those people, guiding them and how guiding them in overcoming or solving particular problems and what some of their options and concerns might be.
Yeah, and use common sense. Like, common sense is not so common. And I mean, just common sense, and just review your work. And
I would say conversational. Make it simple, easy to understand. Show that you care. Show that you're knowledgeable. Go through different nuances if it's appropriate.
All very wise advice.
And Peggy, give us your website again and just remind us what information is available there, including a lot of free, helpful information.
Yes, my website is PeggyMcColl.com, which is PEGGYMCCOLL.com, PeggyMcColl.com. And I have a free resource there. And one of the things that I offer is a webinar called Epitome Roadmap, where I talk about what's involved in being an author and what the potential is and what you need to know, some of the common myths that are sort of debunked as well. And all of that they can find by going to PeggyMcColl.com.
And if someone, wants to consult with you on whether their idea might be marketable or publishable, or whether they want to help underwrite a friend or colleague or young person or old person in getting their book out, are you available to consult on those things?
Yeah, absolutely. They just email support@PeggyMcColl.com, or right on my website, there's a contact us form they can fill in. It actually lands in my inbox. I have a team of people that work with me, but we're all very diligent. We're on top of it. We all get copies of that, so they'll definitely get a response.
And you'll try to help guide them whether it's doable and what it might cost and what are some other things they want to work on before they're ready. Or maybe they're ready to self-publish or get it out now.
Yeah, absolutely. I've worked with people that have already written their books. I've worked with people that don't have a clue. I'm working with a woman right now. She just sold her business. She's a professional, and she wants to write a book but doesn't know what to write about. So we've started to work together to determine what perfect subject she could write about.
And you mentioned earlier about finding an editor, and that can usually help with the process. And just reiterate, how does someone do that?
Well, there's a variety of things that they can do. I recommend them to use a company called Hasmark, HASMARK.com services. And they have Hasmark services. They have a whole host of editors on their staff, and they'll find the perfect editor for your type of book. Also, you can go to a place like Fiverr, Upwork. There's a lot of these places online where there are independent editors that are available that you can hire.
And I meant to ask also, what about finding a publisher? You said sometimes it's good to find a publisher. What's one way to try to connect with publishers?
You have to go through a literary agent. Publishers do not want to hear from authors.
So how do you find a literary agent?
Go online, literary agents, look for literary agents that work in your genre. You want to make sure that they actually cover your topic, and then you email them.
And if they accept you, they're going to take a percentage of the retainer. They're not looking for upfront money.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't even work with a literary agent if they wanted upfront money. It's usually 15% of North American rights, 20% of foreign rights. That's what they earn. So if you're receiving an advance, let's say of $100,000, they get $15,000. Let's say you earn $500,000, they get 15% of that. That's the way it works. Unless it's foreign rights, then they get 20%.
And I hope that math works for everyone out there. I'd like to thank everyone for listening to Law You Should Know on 90.3 WHPC. If you missed any part of this program or the prior program on writing a book, just go to nccradio.org, and please join us this same time next week for another program on Law You Should Know.